Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I am Thena Robinson-Mock, Program Officer with Communities for Just Schools Fund, and we are a proud partner of the Public Welfare Foundation. We're a national donor collaborative that supports and resources grassroots community organizations as they organize for transformative education and youth justice in their schools and communities. Today, I feel like I hit the lottery. I am honored to be able to moderate a conversation with an incredible group of leaders who are working not just on the front lines, but what I like to describe as the freedom side to transform justice in communities across the country. Each of the leaders that we'll hear from today truly exemplify through their life's work, justice that's just. And today we'll center their bold and innovative ideas that are taking shape in Washington, D.C., Louisiana, Colorado, and Milwaukee. Throughout this panel conversation, I want to invite everyone to please drop your questions in the Q&A box. We'll aim to hold space during this panel to take your questions. So please share both questions, sparks. You can also share virtual snaps if you want, affirmations, anything that comes up for you as you hear this conversation today. So now let's quickly introduce our panelists and then we'll get right into the conversation. Today, again, honored to be joined by Patrice Sulton, founder and executive director of DC Justice Lab, Ernest Johnson, director of Ubuntu Village, New Orleans, Richard Morales, deputy executive director of Latino Coalition for Community Leadership, and Mark Mertens, administrator of Milwaukee Division of Youth and Family Services. Welcome everyone to this conversation. All right, so let's just dive right in. I am actually going to turn to Patrice Sulton first. My great pleasure to introduce you, Patrice. And when we think about your work at DC Justice Lab, you've unlocked so many possibilities for justice transformation in Washington, D.C. And your work has brought a much needed shift in the narrative of how we think about policing, incarceration, and transformative possibilities in the district. So Patrice, can you reflect on what you see as some of the biggest challenges and opportunities of this past year in your work? And also, happy one-year anniversary to DC Justice Lab.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here with everyone. We're brand new and I'm getting so much energy from this space. And it's really, I'm just really grateful to be here, to be galvanized and to help share out what we've been doing. It's been a really busy year here. We don't find any passion in playing small and have been taking really, really big swings in all of those spaces in policing and prosecution and punishment here in the district. And I think that this year has been an opportunity in and of itself, right? That there has been a change in the narrative nationally about what the goal is, right? What the North Star of reform or abolition looks like, and a much more widespread understanding of how far off that goal we really are. And so I'm excited to be in this work in the nation's capital. I'm excited to be in a position to have enough people around us who want to see the same change that we want to see, helping move the work forward. So it's really great to be with everyone here.
Thank you so very much. I am excited now to turn to Ernest Johnson, director of Ubuntu Village, New Orleans. Ubuntu Village fights for social, economic, and transformational justice for children and communities and works with families of youth who are involved in the juvenile legal system. And on a personal note, I first met Ernest Johnson when I began my journey to the work of youth justice in New Orleans. And I am so grateful for all that I have learned from Ernest. So thank you for what you do. And Ernest, as we know that at times there can be some tension among system-based reforms and community-based solutions. And I'd love to hear your reflections on how we can reconcile this. How do we advance system-based reforms and community-based solutions working to advance justice that's truly just?
Thank you for having me, Thena. I think first of all, we have to look at those individuals who are working in systemic systems in a way that we look at humanity and understand them in a way that we want to reflect on ourselves. I think we have to build relationships with the understanding that we are all have a common goal. I find that sometimes that it's complicated because people get into systems, and I think we need to identify when we are talking about systems, opposed to human beings that operate those systems in a way that creates us to build relationship and understand how systemic systems work. And I think it was interesting how the last presenter was saying we need to read and educate ourselves. And I think that's more important, to educate ourselves and understand how systems operate. I don't think we can solely depend on systems. I think we need to transfer that type of energy to the community and begin to become not systems in our community, but become communities that care and share and take care of ourselves, right? Because at the end of the day, we don't want anybody or any family having to deal with the system and believing that a system that has failed us for the last 400 years to do something for us that we can do for ourselves. So I think moving forward, we have to have a lot of hope in the young people that are coming behind us. We need to educate them in a way to have them carry the baton in a way that we want to see the world we want to live in. And we have to work diligently at abolishing systems that does not do anything for us as a community.
Thank you so much, Ernest. And maybe as a quick follow-up to ask you the same question that we asked Patrice, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges and opportunities of this past year?
It's always economics, right? That, versus, wealth gaps that and disparities across the board. We often identify disparities in specific categories, but the disparities that exist among us in the communities of color in particular is always a challenge. Over the last year, we got paralyzed for a little while. I think all of us got paralyzed in a way that we, didn't know how this was going to, outcomes of this was going to become. But I think overall, we were able to move forward. And most of the obstacles was the lack of having the relationships with human beings and talking to individuals in a way that we normally, talk to them and service them, and isolating families in a way that we weren't able to get in touch with them. So I think the isolation and the paralyzing of a total community was one of the biggest obstacles that we faced during the pandemic.
Absolutely. And I know that probably resonates across this network. So thank you so much for that, Ernest. We'll turn now to Richard Morales, Deputy Executive Director of the Latino Coalition for Community Leadership based in Colorado. And Richard is leading groundbreaking efforts to transform safety in Colorado by redirecting resources from prisons to community-led efforts, economic development, and technical assistance support. And Richard, much of your dynamic work happens in coalition with others. So I'd love for you to reflect a bit on how can we best hold diverse coalitions together and keep them pushing the work in the same direction. And if you could also touch a bit on some of the challenges and opportunities over this past year.
You bet. So in Colorado, one of the things that we've been able to do is work with our partners over at the Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition and move about $70 million out of government and deeply into community. And those are community-based organizations that are providing reentry, crime prevention, victim services, and harm reduction. And many of these folks are people who have lived experience. So developing those entities is critical, but you have to have the resources, the power, and the shared decision-making along with those systems to really make this work. And so we've seen that happening over and over again, and those communities growing into that space. But how we did that again was we're so used to fighting over that same small slice of pie. So we had to go out and get more pies. So that was off the table. And so really bringing community together and looking at this as an issue, not territorial, not everybody sharing and keeping their own secrets because they're afraid to give up something that might give somebody else a competitive edge, but really creating a movement and everybody seeing that we're going to tackle reentry, we're going to tackle violence in our communities. These are the things as Ernest said, these are things that squarely fit within community. We don't need more police, we don't need more jails, we don't need more correction systems. We need more community really vested into this and resourced well enough to do this work. What we've seen over the last 18 months in terms of some of these challenges and opportunities is, the challenge is that, people who are hungry were just hungrier. People who had poor jobs had no jobs. So as, the federal, state, local government was shutting services down, that left even a bigger hole. So community once again stepped into that space and then gave a lot more of themselves, figure out how to work this, get services to people that are needed. The challenge to that was they did it at a great cost to themselves. They gave and gave and gave, and when they felt like they couldn't give no more, they felt guilty about that and then just continued to give. So that self-care aspect is real.
Absolutely, Richard. Just so appreciate you lifting up that point. And I'm going to turn now to Mark. Mark Mertens has been leading groundbreaking efforts also in Milwaukee County to reduce the number of youth incarcerated there, and not just reduce, but ultimately zero out that number. Mark has also called for a redirection and reinvestment of resources previously used for incarceration into community-based programs and transformative systems of care and support for young people and their communities. And so, Mark, we know that our justice system is in need of a total overhaul. Meager gains aren't going to get the job done, but we also know that we're balancing this tension with the need to start somewhere. And so in your work, how do you balance these tensions when deciding where to place your focus and energy? And if you could also touch on some of the challenges and opportunities over this past year.
Thank you. Yes, there have been incredible challenges this last year. Many, within our own division, dealing with the grief, frankly, of loss. People in my division that have lost loved ones either to the pandemic, one of the two pandemics, I'll say, either to COVID or to gun violence. We've lost family members to both within our division. So, trying to keep us strong as a family, a working family is a challenge in these times. And one of the things that I think that a leader is responsible for is authentically communicating optimism, even in really tough times. So really had to communicate that we can get through this. We can make lives better, even in the face of escalating violence in our community, escalating serious youth crime in our community. That's been a challenge, and there's been some momentum to swing the pendulum back the other way. So we've been working to build coalitions. This feels a little different than previous attempts to swing the pendulum, in that I think we have more people that are working together to solve problems, to look from a public health perspective at violence in our community. So we work closely with law enforcement, with our chief judge, with the Office of Violence Prevention, with the medical college and others to be proactive wherever we can, and to create a culture where we move beyond the finger pointing and looking for someone to blame, and we start to really recognize that our community is distressed, and it's been distressed for generations because of disinvestment, because of racism. We're one of the most segregated cities in the United States, and we have one of the greatest disparities of wealth and health disparities as well in the country. So we have a lot of challenges. So the only way to face those challenges is to move away from the things that don't work, like over-incarceration, and reinvest toward things that are going to make a difference.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. I see I'm monitoring the chat box a little bit here to see some shout outs to Patrice and your work. And also want to just encourage folks to please drop your questions in the Q&A if you have some or any sparks or reflections that come up for you. Patrice, we'll turn back to you. So as we reflect on this past year and all of the various ways that circumstances of this year ushered in moments and movements for transformative change and possibility, where in your work at DC Justice Lab are you seeing some tipping point opportunities? So that's sort of part one. And then maybe part two to that is also this question around coalitions, because I see that we had a question in the Q&A around coalitions. So just curious, how do you work in coalition or hold diverse coalitions together and keep them pushing in the same direction in your work?
Well, with respect to a tipping point, right, there are some huge changes that appear to be right on the cusp of in DC, but that last push is sometimes the hardest push. And so one example of that is my job before this was rewriting the DC criminal code, right, the whole thing. And it's a really, really big lift. It's a difficult challenge to carve out the law with the kind of clarity and precision that it deserves to have. And I know that Colorado is looking to do something similar. Maryland's looking to do something similar. And I sort of come to policing and these other spaces with the same goal in mind, right? Like, why not do an entire overhaul? Why not just start over? There's no way that we could possibly make this worse. And even though it feels like really big swings a lot of the time, when you look at how other communities live and the liberties that a lot of other people have outside of the Black people who live in DC, it's obvious that it isn't really asking too much, right? And so that's how I come into this work, right? We're not asking for too much, and we're not asking, quite frankly. This is something that has to be done. There's power that exists there. And so I don't really see this as sort of moving power into community. I think the power is already there. I think we need to use that power to move things in a really significant way. And we have a lot of proof of concept already that when you center the voices of people who are affected, that's where the best ideas live. We wrote an expungement bill that fixes the record sealing statute in DC that they couldn't fix for the last 16 years. And because we wrote it with returning citizens, we were able to do it in a matter of weeks. And it's better than anything that DC's had. It's better than anything any other state has with respect to record sealing, as far as I'm concerned. And it was introduced by more than half the council, which is all you need to pass something like that. And we're going to do the same thing with policing. We're going to do the same thing with the conditions of our jail here. And in 6 months, having 3 huge bills like that already introduced, I feel really confident that that tipping point is really near if we can stay the course.
Powerful. And I'm just want to take a second to really lift up what you said. I mean, really, like, we're not asking, right? When it comes to justice, there's no compromising on that. So I just so appreciate that energy and that vibe. Thank you. Turning to you, Ernest, again, this past year has been one where many organizations have approached their work in new ways because this moment has called for that. In your work, what new innovations have you tried as a result of the circumstances of the last 18 months?
Well, it's obvious that we've become participants in Zoom and using social media, and I'm relying on a lot of my staff to also do that, but utilizing non-in-person meetings was one of the greatest tools that initially I thought I wasn't gonna like, right? It was just like something really new to me because I was used to the human contact. But after utilizing it for a period of time, it kept us connected in a way that we were able to still do some of the work that we were doing. But it became, at some point, we got fatigued, Zoom fatigue, that we realized that we had to start going out and having contact with some of the parents that we work with. So I think that was one of the most innovating things for us. It wasn't really innovating because everyone was utilizing it, but the way we utilize it to make contact so that we were able to still have the human contact and kind of bring people together in a way that we normally wouldn't have during the pandemic.
Absolutely. And yes, Zoom fatigue is real. Thank you for that, Ernest. Thank you. I'm seeing some great questions emerging in the chat box and also the Q&A, so we'll definitely make sure to turn to those. I want to turn back to Mark to ask you the same question as applied to the work taking shape in Milwaukee. What new innovations have you tried as a result of the circumstances of the last 18 months?
Well, we're trying a lot of different things, but all of them have to do, I think, with engagement. Engaging youth differently, engaging the community differently. We've introduced a credible messenger program, which was launched in May after quite a period of planning and training. So I'm really proud that that's off the ground. As a part of that, we had what we call a learning community, where we actually brought in trainers to train over 50 credible messengers from 11 different community agencies, and really then developed the program from that, and ended up selecting 5 different agencies after talking to all 11 about readiness, to see which of the 11 were prepared to scale up and begin to implement the program on a bigger scale. We selected 5 to do that. But what I learned from that was that it wasn't really about program development. It wasn't about sort of sitting in our ivory tower and saying, we want this program, so we're going to write an RFP and select a winner, and by virtue of that, select a bunch of people that don't get funded. We decided to approach it from a more horizontal grassroots perspective. And that's the way we want to go forward with a lot of things. We're experimenting now with a participatory budgeting process where we involve the community to help identify issues and help identify the solutions for those issues, so that it isn't us saying, here's the solution, we're the experts, but we're actually trying to work with the community on identifying those solutions and then finding ways to build capacity in the community to do that. So many small agencies don't have the capacity to compete for government contracts through the RFP process. So we're really trying to level the playing field a little bit, acknowledge the amazing talent and hard work and incredible organizations that we have within our community that are doing the work every day, whether they get our contracts or not. So how do we build and how do we grow that capacity? I think that's the primary thing that I learned. We've done a lot with programming. We're establishing a new case management model that's both built on positive youth development, called the growth-focused case management model. We're getting interest from other jurisdictions around the country about the model. I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited about our work to zero out corrections. We've hired a project manager whose only focus is exercising all of our strategies to get us to zero. So there's a lot of exciting things going on.
Incredibly powerful. Thank you so much, Mark. And coming to you next, Richard. We know that everyone is deeply engaged in this work, and it can be hard to sometimes have time to share what's happening. So how are you getting the word out about the new and transformative models for justice that you all are building in Colorado?
You know, we've been blessed to have a lot of partners like Public Welfare Foundation that are helping us get the word out, and jurisdictions hearing about what's happening in Colorado and coming in to see firsthand. So meeting with the community partners, meeting with the agencies that we're working with, meeting with us as an intermediary to try to figure out how this works, because the truth is every jurisdiction has all of these same elements. There's no magic here in Colorado other than this focus of people coming together and willing to do the hard work and just, you know, find the solutions. So we're seeing a lot of that word getting pushed out. We've had the Urban Institute push out reports about what they're seeing and finding here. So those kind of instruments, and through just others coming in and saying, hey, what's happening there? It looks like there's something interesting. And each community is going to put their own spin, their own take on it, because Colorado isn't Louisiana, isn't Minnesota, you know, on and on. So you have to be able to get really creative with your community and figure out what works, and then keep innovating on that, because there is no finish line in this work. So you're constantly trying to find new and creative ways, because at one point we think we had it, and then we discovered, well, the same family that has someone returning for prison has a kid involved in the gang, has some domestic violence. So why aren't we braiding all of our services together to try to approach the family as a whole? But that takes a lot more coordination at a community level. So there's all these things that we're constantly trying to do to innovate and get the word out and inspire others.
Thank you so much, Richard. And yes, that work is truly, truly inspiring. I want to turn now to some of the wonderful questions that I see coming through. There is a question. I'll read it out. Can the panel name some of their most successful strategies that they've used working with government agencies, elected officials, and court systems that do not see the need for complete overhaul, but just incremental reforms? Patrice, would you like to take a crack at that question?
Sure. So one of the things that I think worked well for the Criminal Code Reform Commission, which is still underway, like the big rollout is today and tomorrow. But what was different about the way that we went about doing this as compared to other earlier efforts that didn't make it is we had a feedback loop all along, right? So every month we met with an advisory group that was the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Attorney General's Office, because those are our two prosecutors in what is not a state yet, the Public Defender Service here, and legal scholars, and submitted recommendations to them and got feedback orally and writing all along the way. And in contrast to what happened in another state that did a project like this, they'd spent 4 years writing this because it's really, really hard to do. And at the last minute, the Attorney General just filed 30 pages of objections and killed the entire project. And so I think having relationships, even if they're not what you would consider friendly relationships or relationships among like-minded people, still matter. The conversations still matter, even when they're contentious. And so that's something that I think has been really important to the success of that project. And I would describe that as both something really transformative and something incremental, right? It's not an abolition of the criminal legal system. It's a tailoring of it. It's making it clearer and more precise, but it's a dramatic change from what we have now, which is just these very broadly written laws that expect police and prosecutors to apply them fairly and act disappointed every time.
Thank you for that. Yes. I want to open it up to our other panelists to maybe approach that same question around some successful strategies that you've used working with government agencies, elected officials, court systems, again, that do not see the need for complete overhaul, but just incremental reforms. Ernest, do you have any reflections on that question?
Yeah, we just recently had a bill passed in Louisiana, House Bill 216, that became a debt-free juvenile justice system that eliminated fines and fees. And one of the most strategic things I think was with us to make us successful is we had partners, unlikely partners that normally wouldn't be partners with us, to have a voice in this bill, right? And we kind of took the back seat and educated the community, but in a hierarchy and system players, we allowed those voices to have the voice and talk to them. I say that to say, as leaders, I think a lot of times we have to step back, right? And have a reflection and have a strategy that's going to reach a common goal without having an ego that it's my bill or I have all the power and I can make a change in a way, and utilizing everyone's voice on the same scale, right? And balancing in a way that amplifies the importance of each and everyone who's a part of this to have some value, right? And a lot of times through this process, and I tell you, it's a job dealing with the Louisiana legislature, right? It's a different beast, but we had unlikely folks, again, that we normally wouldn't work with to amplify their voices and amplify our voices at the same time to get the bill passed. I'll leave you with our greatest goal in being strategic is building relationships. It's easily done in Louisiana over hurricanes sometimes and over good meals sometimes. But we like to build relationships, right? And have the value and look at the humanity in every human being. And when you do that, you can build a trust factor because again, I don't have any trust in the system, so I have to rely on human beings to make that happen.
That's a word right there. Thank you, Ernest. Same question for you, Richard. And then Mark, I'll also come to you with the same question.
I think for me, echoing some of what Ernest was talking about is the relationship. And there was a couple things that we had to do right away is one, just demonstrate our competence and our character. Those were key in being able to come into this space, because where we had started was, we had a terrible incident where our director of parole was murdered by a parolee. So the system was going to put another $10 million into the system to try to fix this, and the community was nowhere to be found. So our partner agency, CCRC, went and fought for the money, and it's always a fight for the money. So that's where you have the power, the decision-making, the resources to move a lot of these things. So we stepped into space under kind of an adversarial type of situation of they really didn't want to give us the money. So we had to come in and step into this and prove, through the reporting, through the data collections, through the accountability, through the demonstration that our community could serve community in a way that they couldn't. So that was incredibly important, and over time develop those relationships to demonstrate that over again and again. And the place where the program had first started back at $500,000 a year is now $7 million a year, and the department kicks in another $2 million. So they're actually coming to the table with all this additional resources because they're seeing the value that community can play, but that relationship through the character and competence had to be built.
Powerful, Richard. Thank you. And Mark, same question for you around successful strategies.
Yeah, thank you. If there were one or two really singular strategies that we could sort of hang our hats on, we would, whoever knew them would and had them would be out on the speaking circuit, sharing that information widely. It's really a matter of all the things that have been talked about here: relationships, being genuine, being unrelenting, having absolute determination, knowing your mission, knowing your purpose, and sticking to it, having laser focus on it, and always being able to speak through the lens of the people that you're serving. I was really struck by Dr. Carter Jackson's presentation earlier, and the quote about life not being a spectacle, and that a crying man is not a dancing bear. And I think about yesterday. I attended a hearing, a change of placement hearing on a young girl, 16, African-American girl in our system, where the district attorney was looking to change her placement to a correctional setting, and made her opening argument referring to the case, consistently calling it the case, and citing 20 plus placements since she was removed by Child Protective Services, and placement disruptions, and now we're here, and the only thing left is to basically lock her up. And I just wanted to jump out of my chair. Frankly, I don't attend many hearings at this point in my career, only when it's really necessary. And so I bided my time to really correct the whole narrative about this being a case. This is about this girl. And I was able to talk about attachment, and that's what's missing here. It's not about this magic place we can send her to get all better. This is a young lady that had a series of misdemeanor batteries in placement settings because she doesn't feel safe and she doesn't feel attached. So really needed to back up and help the people in the room to understand and see her as a person and understand that just escalating, as we do so often, when plan A fails, we want to move to plan B and plan C and escalate up the chain of restrictiveness of placements, when we really should be thinking about, why isn't this plan working, from the lens of the person we're trying to help, and put things in place to make it work for them. What sorts of supports can we put in place? My worker that is working with this young lady put together a remarkable plan, found some really caring foster parents that are committed to this girl. And the case was not resolved yesterday. She remains in our detention center, and there's still a possibility that she's going to go to a correctional facility, in spite of the fact that we have an effective place for her that can help her, with people that care about her. So I'll be back in that courtroom, and I'll be back trying to talk about it through the lens of that girl. So I don't know if that's a strategy. Maybe it's just about never losing sight of that, never forgetting why you got into this work and to begin with.
Absolutely, Mark. So much of it is about changing that conversation, asking a different question, all of that. Thank you so much for that. There's a really cool question that I wanted to pose here that I see in the chat box, and it's this, and I'll sort of really just allow anyone to respond if you feel moved. And the question that came through was, do any of you see the need to build something new that does not exist? Please wax poetically on that. Would anyone like to hop in for that question? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Well, I would say something that would be new and very welcome would be a justice system that's free from bias and is fair and equitable. And that would actually put me out of a job eventually. I would love to be able to leave this job and not have to think about a succession plan. I wish I could leave it and the job would end along with my career at some point.
Thank you for that. Others?
Very intentional about naming our organization Ubuntu Village, because we believe that it's the reflection of the humanity that we see in others, that we see in ourselves. And I think if our common goal is to try to look at everything from the lens of empathy and to create a community in which we care and share about each other. And we do that in our work every day that exemplifies that character. I think too often we look way out and have all these visions about how we want to create a world when sometimes it's right there in our lap, but we don't utilize it. And I think we often look at statuses that devalue one from the other when we have so much in common. So I think we should all look at each other in a way that we see ourselves, and that we all have some value, and we all are leaders, or we all are kings and queens, in a way that we exemplify that every day. And I think when we look at it that way, I think we'll see the world we want to live in each and every day that we live on this earth.
For me, a dream for me would be tackling our foster care system in Colorado. We see some of the worst outcomes. It's definitely feeding our criminal justice system. It's failing our kids. And so for community getting involved and being resourced, I think in that aspect of what we've seen in all of these other areas, that community has a lot to offer and it's being really underutilized. So just creating a fifth community reinvestment initiative, focusing on the foster care system to really start addressing that need, that for me would be quite something.
I love the question, Shaka. I have two answers. One is, as I mentioned in the Q&A, one thing is building a Black-led policy forum, right? Like a pro-Black rule-making body. I think that rules matter even when they're written in a way that is terrible, even when they're written in a way that no one respects them, they still have a practical impact on people's lives. And I think that we should be writing the rules, since we're the ones in DC, exclusively the ones being governed by those rules. And then just sort of more broadly, since you said wax poetically about it, I think building a culture, right? Building a culture that doesn't subjugate people based on what they did or what they got in trouble for that one time. And I think that that's a much harder lift, because we see that in every community that we talk to, that line drawing happens. That's what people want to do. They want to line draw and they want to subjugate. That happens in conversations I have with white people who are racist. It happens in conversations I have with returning citizens who want to distinguish themselves from people who have been convicted of a sex offense, or from people who have been convicted of a homicide offense. That otherizing is so ingrained in our culture. Even when we talk about what the solutions are, right? We like to criticize whoever's on the other side of the equation. We like to find these differences. And so if I could build something, I would build a culture that doesn't subjugate people based on those really, really artificial differences between us.
So powerful. Thank you, Patrice. I so love that question. I'm going to turn back to our beautiful list of questions here. And the next one that I see is, what strategies are panelists engaging in to shift government money currently being used to punish youth to a solution based on positive youth development and building healthy communities that respond to the true needs of young people? What's working? What are the barriers? And for this one, we can just take a couple of responses if for anyone that wants to tackle that one.
I can talk about Wisconsin a little bit. We have a system called Youth Aids, which is state general purpose revenue, tax revenue, that gets disseminated to counties. We have 72 counties. Milwaukee is the largest. According to a formula having to do with crime statistics, youth delinquency statistics, the use of correctional facilities and so on. So you get an allocation according to that formula. So Milwaukee County's allocation is just shy of $40 million. It's about 35 or 37 million right now. And out of that, we pay a daily rate for youth that get sent to the state correctional facilities. So any time that we reduce numbers, and in the last 5 years, we've reduced our numbers by about 80%. We were at about 120 youth in corrections back in early 2016. I think we're at 20 youth today. So we've reduced significantly. And for every one of those youth at today's daily rate, that would have been $615 a day that we would be paying to corrections. So instead of paying that to corrections, we're using those funds for community-based programming. And as I mentioned earlier, we're starting now to look at how do we more directly work with community about having community participate in how those funds get spent. So as we get closer and closer to zero, those funds will be reinvested. Now, the flip side of that is that last week, our legislature voted to approve a new daily rate. So it will go, if it gets passed, it will go from the current $615 a day to $1,156 a day. So there are forces working in the other direction that are keeping the funding in the carceral system that we have to work against. And it makes it even more urgent for us to get to zero.
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. In Colorado, we have a transforming safety program. So what happened was we divested money coming out of the Department of Corrections and then put that into community. And so that's in 2 pilot sites right now, Aurora and Colorado Springs, 2 areas that were identified as high crime communities. And then we pulled together a local advisory group made of community members to design what does safety look like in their community. And so all different kinds of programs came up. At the height of the program, there was 46 different community partners being funded through those funds to provide community safety in those two communities. COVID kind of cut that amount in half, so we're kind of restarting that up again. Good news is that the legislature just passed an expansion bill. So expands transforming safety into 2 rural communities. So we see this money coming from state government. It's in the general fund. It's year after year. They put a sunset date on it where it's reviewed, and I think another 4 or 5 years. So this money isn't like grants where you have it for 2 years or 3 years and then it's gone. This is something you can continue to build upon, showing the performance and everything that we're doing in community. So that's been exciting to see.
Thank you. And I'll pose one last question to our panelists as we get ready to wrap here. What advice do you have for this community of partners? It could be advice or final reflection around staying the course, staying uplifted, staying inspired in this work. If you could offer your final reflection, sort of a lightning round, we'd love to hear that. Patrice, we'll come back to you on that question first.
I think, you know, what I've learned so far, right, that's being very early in this space, in this nonprofit space, is that, you know, a lot of the things that seem easy and obvious to those of us who have been fighting for the change we want to see for a long time isn't obvious to everyone. Like the things that seemed most apparent to me was that when you center people who are affected, they have the best ideas, that it's not just about being fair. It's not just about looking like you're a nice person. That's actually where all of the most brilliant ideas are. And that's not something that's everyone's starting point. And so spaces like this, right, where we can see and celebrate each other's really great ideas, great strategies, and great work, I think matter. And I hope to see more of these conversations happen and more people pulled in to hear from experts like the people that I'm sitting next to. So it's been a real pleasure for me to be able to learn from you all. And I'm so grateful for everything that you're doing in your respective cities.
Thank you. And coming to you next, Ernest.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Patrice. I would say stay connected to nature in many ways, the trees, the water, the land, in a way that acts according to the spirit of our will. Keep uplifting each individual around you, value them as you value yourself. Use the lens of empathy and humanity to be your guidance, and never, never, never forget and never, never give up.
Love that. Richard and then Mark.
Dang, Ernest, you're a deep well, man. I got to connect with you. For me, it's really staying connected with the community partners, the people who are on the ground doing the work. You know, our coffees, our lunches, our get-togethers, us hanging out, just hearing what's going on, sharing our triumphs, our frustrations. It lets me know I'm not alone, that there's a community, and I have a community to lean into and lean on when things are both good and bad. And for me, that's just what keeps it going.
Thank you. And Mark, coming to you next.
Two things, sort of to echo Patrice a little bit, just keep looking around in your community and nationally both, but especially in your community, at the people that inspire you, that are doing this work, that are out there every day trying to make the community a better place. And then the other thing is, you never know what's going to influence a youth. You never know if that one thing you say is going to resonate with someone, or if that one relationship that you help facilitate, maybe with an employer or a teacher, you never know what's going to make a difference. It's different for every youth. And so there's a whole ocean of possibilities out there, and you have to just keep at it until you find the right fit for the right youth.
Powerful. I just want to thank all of you so very much for this conversation today. This has just been incredible. Patrice, Ernest, Richard, Mark, thank you for your powerful work in your various communities and just for being an inspiration to us all. Thank you so very much for joining in today.
And Thena, I would be remiss if I wouldn't say thank you to Candace and Public Welfare and all the staff that were putting this together and giving us this opportunity. I salute you. Continue the good work that you all are doing.
Beautiful. Thank you, everyone.